Welcome, Hoosier fans, to another episode of Podcast on the Brink, your weekly dose of Indiana University basketball news and discussion. I'm your host, Jerod Morris. Podcast on the Brink is a joint production of the Assembly Call and Inside the Hall. For complete coverage of IU basketball, visit assemblycall.com and insidethehall.com. On this week's edition of Podcast on the Brink, Alex and I recap what was just an incredible opening weekend of the NCAA tournament. There's a few Indiana angles, and then we talk about the tournament at large and, man, just how difficult it is to win in this crazy tournament. And then Alex welcomes in Kyle Neddenriep from the Indianapolis Star, and the two of them have a very in-depth conversation about this past weekend at the semi-state. Obviously, Romeo Langford and Demezy Anderson both lost, so they recap what happened in those games with those two players, reflect on their magnificent basketball careers, and look ahead to what's on tap this weekend. All of that and more on this week's edition of Podcast on the Brink. Buying tickets can be complicated and confusing, but there is a better way to buy with SeatGeek. SeatGeek is the smartest, easiest way to get tickets to every type of live event, because whether you're searching for a last-minute deal, planning a night out with friends, or need to find the perfect gift, SeatGeek helps you find the best seats at the best prices, and it's all fully guaranteed. There is nothing quite like being there in person, and SeatGeek will get you closer to the action for a great value. I have the SeatGeek app on my phone right now, and it is by far the easiest way that I have found to shop for tickets, because I can be anywhere, and with just a few taps, I can instantly find seats. And I'm planning on using the SeatGeek app here in just a few weeks. I was actually just texting with a fellow IU fan friend last night, and we're plotting going to see Yogi play for the Mavericks. It's a little hard for me to do that during the IU season, but once the season is over, I plan on getting out there at least once, hopefully a couple times, and I'm definitely going to use the SeatGeek app, because when I've done it in the past, that's how I've gotten my tickets, and it really is easy, really the best way to do it. And the reason for that is because SeatGeek is designed to make your ticket buying experience easier than ever, because they save you time and money by searching multiple ticket sites to compare prices and find you amazing deals. And one way to make that deal even more amazing is to use the promo code BRINK, B-R-I-N-K, because when you do that, you get $20 off of your first SeatGeek purchase. So the instructions there are just download the SeatGeek app, enter the promo code BRINK, B-R-I-N-K, and you will get $20 off your first SeatGeek purchase. All right, I am joined right now on Podcast on the Brink by Alex Bozich. And Alex, I know you just recorded an interview with Kyle Neddenriep. I actually haven't had a chance to listen to it yet, but we're going to play that here in about 15 minutes after you and I are done reflecting on the NCAA tournament. You guys talk about, obviously, the past weekend in terms of high school basketball with Romeo and Demezy in the semi-state. So very much looking forward. I haven't even heard it yet, so looking forward to listening to that. I'm sure the audience is as well. But before we get to that, let's talk about the opening weekend of the NCAA tournament. And I know, look, this is an IU basketball show. Indiana wasn't even there, but I think there are actually a few interesting Indiana angles that we can hit. But before we do that, I just want to get your general impressions of easily one of the wackiest opening weekends we've seen. I mean, 3 of the top 6 KenPom teams already out, 10 of the top 20 KenPom teams already out. 2 number 1 seeds are out, 1 lost on the first night. I mean, just kind of insane and irrational, wouldn't you say?
No doubt. It was, in a lot of ways, proof of how hard it is to win at the highest level in college basketball, because, as you mentioned, the number 1 overall seed, Virginia, who was the best team pretty much in college basketball all season, won an outright ACC championship by multiple games. And I know they were down their 6th man, but that was not the reason that they lost by 20 points to a 16 seed. That's the first time that's ever happened. And then obviously the Indiana tie-ins, you had Kelvin Sampson, former IU coach, with Devin Davis as one of his top players, win a game in exciting fashion in the first round, and then come back and lose to Big Ten foe Michigan on what was a great buzzer beater by Jordan Poole. Jordan Poole. I was happy to see him make that shot because I had a chance last year at the Derby Festival to interview Jordan Poole for Hoops, who obviously does a great job covering Michigan, and just talking to that kid. What a fun young man to talk to. Great personality. You can tell that he carries himself with just with a confidence, not cockiness, confidence. And I wasn't surprised at all that he made that shot. And then, Michigan State. I'm sure IU fans had some flashbacks to Indiana's performance against Syracuse when Indiana had trouble with the 2-3 zone back in 2013. Now, that was a better Syracuse team that Indiana played, but both, I think, examples show you that how, you have to be able in this tournament to adapt to any style. And Virginia showed us that, they really had a small margin for error in a lot of ways. They won they all season by kind of perfecting their one style of play, but once they got behind and didn't really have any way to speed the game up or really create offense, we saw that they were vulnerable. And the same thing with Michigan State. They had all that talent and all that length, but they came up against a situation where they just couldn't get shots to fall from the perimeter. And Syracuse, giving them credit for, stymieing the Spartans for most of the afternoon, making it incredibly difficult for them to punch through. So really, the thing I learned the most is, it's terrifying going into the tournament if you're a really good team, because you can have a great season like Virginia did. And this kind of goes back to what happened in Indiana in 2013. They had a great season, and then in one game, 140-minute setting on a neutral court, anything can happen, and all of a sudden the season is remembered completely different based on one outcome.
Which is unfortunate. And I went back and forth with some people on Twitter about this weekend, which is, look, I understand how college basketball works, and the tournament is so much fun, and it's such a great way to crown a champion from a spectator standpoint. But I do think that context is important and nuance is important when we remember teams. And you talk about how terrifying it is for a great team to go into the tournament, and part of that is because you have so much to lose as a great team in the tournament, and there's such kind of a thin margin for error for you actually kind of putting a cherry on top of your season, because most of the possible outcomes are going to end it on a downer. And you look at a team like Virginia that won 31 out of their 34 games. They were so good all season long, and now they will forever be remembered as the first number 1 seed that lost to a 16 seed. And that's how it should be. If you're the number 1 seed and you lose like that, especially the way they played, which just looked like their spirit had just been beaten and broken, which is why I made the comparison to Virginia's loss look like what happened to Indiana against Indiana State and Fort Wayne. Not in any way that the results were comparable, but just the way that UMBC just went nuts from downtown. And then Virginia tries overhelping out to the 3-point line, then they can't contain the dribblers, and it's like their will was just broken, their spirit was just broken. But now you look at it, and their season will be remembered as a failure, which I kind of felt happened to Indiana after the 2013 season. And I do think it's important to at least try to put things in context and remember how random isn't the right word, but just how unpredictable these 40-minute segments in a tournament can be, and it doesn't render everything that came before it meaningless. Virginia still had a great season. Indiana in 2013 still had a great season. Cincinnati, Michigan State, they had great seasons. And so, look, that's the nature of the tournament, that it's, so much is riding on these 3 weeks in March. But I feel kind of in moments like these, the need to remind everybody that there should be balance in how we remember teams. And while March is extremely important, it is a 6-month season, and there's more that matters than just what happens over these 3 weeks.
Yeah, it's what makes the tournament great. The single elimination format. I think in a lot of ways it's it's a great way to crown a champion. I don't necessarily think it gives us the best team every year as the winner. It's the team that played the best for those 3 weeks, and that's important to remember. In the NBA and Major League Baseball, any other professional sport, there's a 3, 5, 7 game series, whatever it is. And, in most cases, you're going to get the superior team coming out on top just based on the number of times that they play. But as we saw, I mean, going into that UMBC Virginia game, most people would have given, less than a 1% chance for the upset, but there is that chance. And so that's really what makes the NCAA tournament really the most unique sporting event and maybe the most exciting to follow as a fan, is that this opening weekend, you have all these opportunities for these smaller schools to rise up and punch their ticket to the next round and make a memory that people will remember forever. We'll always remember UMBC now for beating Virginia to be the first 16 seed to advance. We'll always remember Loyola Chicago and Sister Jean and the story that's become. And we'll always remember, the talented teams now that DeAndre Ayton at Arizona, who got knocked out early. We'll remember Xavier, who had a great season to an extent, them not being able to get out of the second round. All these different things that happen wouldn't happen without the NCAA tournament. If it was, a 3-game series or a 5-game series, the superior team is going to come out on top for the most part. And that, to me, what makes the tournament great. I mean, you don't always get the best team, but you get an exciting outcome for the most part, year in, year out. And I agree with you that there has to be some perspective on remembering kind of the whole body of work. For Virginia, obviously, it's a lot easier to root for them just based on the way that Tony Bennett handled himself in the aftermath, kind of the humility that he showed. He wasn't a poor sport. He stood up there, answered the questions, said that they got beat, they got outplayed, didn't make excuses, and that's really how it should be. And I think that people, obviously, in all aspects of life, can learn a lot from just the way he handled that. I thought it was just a really classy way for him to go out. But yeah, it's just a cruel it's a cruel deal. It's a lot of fun for us to follow as those who cover it and are fortunate enough to write about college basketball for a living. But you got to remember that for the people who are as heavily invested in it as these coaches and players, I mean, it's a gut-wrenching thing. I mean, to see Devin Davis laying on the floor like he was,
oh man,
that's just a tough thing to see.
Yeah, it was. And again, I echo what you say. It's just, it's so important to remember that for the teams, for the coaches, because what you want, I mean, look, obviously at some point, if you're in the NCAA tournament enough and you've had enough teams and enough shots at it, especially with favorable seeds, just kind of based on, law of averages, you should make a deep run or two. And at some point, if you don't, at that point, maybe you start to question whether this coach and this school is the right fit. But I think what you want to do is just continue to give yourself good seeds, continue to get into the tournament, because you can have one year like Virginia this year where, holy crap, you have a great seed. It looks like you've got a good path to the Final Four and you lose in the first round. But then take a look at Kentucky, which had such a struggle all season long. They get a 5 seed. And, I mean, has a bracket ever opened up for a 5 seed like Kentucky's? I mean, the bracket for Indiana opened up in 2002, but they still had to play Duke in that Sweet 16 game. I mean, you look at what Kentucky's facing now. And again, if Kentucky makes the Final Four, their entire season is kind of redeemed. And look, you make the Final Four, that's successful. And I mean, they had a successful regular season, but it's almost like every blemish from the regular season is just completely forgotten. And 10 years down the road, you don't necessarily remember the road someone traveled in the tournament. You just remembered where they ended up. But the context of the road you travel and the matchups that you have and who might spring an upset on your side of the bracket, that stuff all matters in the moment a lot, and so that's why I just think the tournament is so much fun. But as much as we can, understanding the nuance of it, remembering the context of it as we make judgments on what a team does in the tournament is helpful, because you can really run the risk of maybe judging a coach or judging a program based on some bad luck in the tournament, where if you're just patient and let that play out, over time, the best programs, the best coaches are going to rise to the top. Think about guys like Jay Wright, who that has happened to. So just think, especially on the heels of, again, as I said, one of the most irrational weekends I've ever seen, I think that kind of context is just important to remember.
Yeah, the Kentucky example is a good one, too, because, I mean, on that side of the bracket now, I'd say, them or Michigan are probably the favorites to play for the national championship just based on how it's opened up. But, how would it look if this Kentucky team went on to get to the championship game or win the national championship? And then look at what happened to them 3 years ago, where they had a perfect season and then lost in the Final Four.
Yeah.
That just kind of showed, that was in terms of, the last 10 years, that was maybe the most dominant team in college basketball, just in terms of what they did over the course of the season. And they didn't even win it. I mean, that's how hard it is. People.
Thank you, Bo Ryan.
Exactly. Thank you, Bo Ryan. But it's just incredibly difficult. There's no margin for error, and I think people thought that the one losing to a 16 would never happen because it hadn't, and everyone this year was like, oh, maybe Penn's gonna do it, and Penn comes out and gives Kansas a little trouble early, and then Kansas pulls away, and everyone's like, oh, we're safe. And I even went to bed early that night, and I woke up and looked at my phone and saw that Virginia had lost, and I had to look at it like 3 times, and I was like, is this real?
It was insane.
And then I went on Twitter, and it was just like, man, I picked the wrong night to go to bed early. But I just think it's awesome. I mean,
yeah,
the tournament is the greatest. The opening weekend of the tournament to me is the best time of the year. I'm obviously going to be excited to watch this weekend and the Final Four and everything, and then it'll be a long off season. But I mean, wow, it's just the range of emotions from everybody involved over that 4-day. You have people experiencing some of the greatest times in their careers, and you have people disappointed and careers coming to an end, and opportunities coming to missed, and guys that the things that happening to them that they may never forget. Devin Davis, I hate to go back to him again, but he missed the 2 free throws. He's going to think about that forever, obviously. And then you have the other side of that. You got Jordan Poole making that shot that he's going to remember forever. So it's just 2 different stories right there in one game.
Yeah.
That 2 guys are going to remember for the rest of their lives, and in completely different ways.
By the way, huge hat tip to John Beeline for delivering the line of the tournament when he said that Jordan Poole had an overdose of swag. I thought that was a great line.
Yeah, that was great. That's a good one.
And then my last question for you: when that shot went in by Jordan Poole, did you feel worse for Devin Davis because of the missed free throws that had preceded it, or better at the fact that Kelvin Sampson was going home a dejected loser? Which emotion was higher in that moment?
That's tough. I felt bad for Devin Davis because
I did too.
Every time I dealt with him, going back to his high school days, just a really nice kid, and obviously things didn't turn out the way he would like, or Indiana fans would like for him in Bloomington. But I was happy to kind of see him get a second chance and move on. What I've hoped for it to be, playing for someone other than Kelvin Sampson, absolutely. But I'm not the kind of I like to have fun with Kelvin on Twitter with his 3-way calling and the text and all that. But I'm not a person that's going to hold a grudge for obviously the rest of my life. But I was happy for Michigan too. Big Ten gets drugged through the mud all season for it wasn't a great year in the league, but here we are with 2 teams in the Sweet 16. And the other thing that happened this weekend that I thought was really unfortunate was the injury to Isaac Haas, and Indiana fans don't obviously want to hear it, but
I agree.
I mean, Isaac Haas, the way he's carried himself over 4 years at Purdue, his family has gone through some tough times with his sister, and just seems like, and I don't know him personally, and you never want to say that person's great or whatever if you don't really know him, but just from watching him from afar, just really seems like an impressive young man, and for him to break his elbow and not be able to play, you just really feel bad for them. And this Purdue team, in a lot of ways, all season long was really just a good basketball team to watch. Not really one star, but I thought they always carried themselves really well, and play the game the right way. So it'll be interesting to see how they do the rest of the way. But Michigan, I think, of the 2 remaining teams, has the best chance to make the Final Four and maybe the national championship game. So I'm looking forward to seeing how that goes.
Hey, they're taking on my wife's Aggies on Thursday, so don't discount Texas A&M, because when they get their defense going, they are lethal.
Yeah.
So, yeah, but one more quick point on Purdue. I agree with you. I actually felt heartbroken when I saw that, just because I hate seeing that for anybody. I mean, I still feel like I have a gaping hole in my childhood not getting to see how the 1993 Indiana team would have done if they were fully healthy. And I know what that's like to kind of carry forward. And, unless Purdue wins a national championship this year, they're going to feel that way, just as they felt after Robbie Hummel got hurt. And so I will cheer against Purdue as much as humanly possible, but I hate it when it's an injury to any team, that does it, because the most fun of being a college basketball fan is seeing every program at their best going at each other. And you hate it when it's, some kind of injury that, that might not allow you to fulfill your potential. So, Harms did a nice job against Butler, so we'll see what they can do. But it just, especially when it's a guy like Haas, you hate to see something like that happen. So even to your arch rival.
No doubt about it. Looking forward to, should be a good weekend of hoops, obviously, at Bankers Life Fieldhouse. There's no IU angle, really, in terms of Demezi and Romeo both being knocked out, but still should be some great games there. And obviously the tournament resumes. And stick around for my conversation coming up next with Kyle Neddenriep. Just a good recap of the weekend that was in the Indiana High School State Tournament. We talk a lot about Romeo and obviously the atmosphere in Seymour. Just a great weekend of basketball. So stick around after this and enjoy that conversation as well.
Yep, I look forward to hearing it myself. So stick around, and a few quick words from Hoosier Proud, and then Alex's conversation with Kyle Neddenriep. Hey, have you had a chance to check out our friends at Hoosier Proud yet? If not, now is a great time. And even if you have had a chance to check out our friends at HoosierProud.com, now's a great time to check them out again and see some of the new gear that they have added since the last time you were there, I guess depending on when that is. But they recently added some new Indiana basketball shirts on their page with all of the officially licensed IU gear. So check out those items. They've got football shirts, they've got basketball shirts, they've got soccer-themed shirts. So there's something there for everybody if you have an IU fan in your life, or just for yourself if you want to find yourself a cool IU t-shirt. And of course, that's not all they have. They also have some of their just really unique designs that are inspired by interesting elements from the Hoosier State. This is kind of how they made a splash when they first came out with some of these really cool t-shirt designs. So you're going to want to check out all of those as well. And the other great thing about going to HoosierProud.com is that you support Indiana-based charities when you buy from them. And so if you go to the website, they actually list out all of the Indiana-based charities that they support. So go there, HoosierProud.com, check that out. And the other great thing is because you are a Podcast on the Brink listener, you get 15% off of your entire order. So when you go to HoosierProud.com and you add all this stuff to your shopping cart, it can be Indiana shirts. They also have the official Inside the Hall t-shirts there as well. So if you want to support Inside the Hall and Podcast on the Brink, you can pick up those t-shirts. But everything in your shopping cart will be 15% off. It's not just one shirt, not just the Inside the Hall shirts. Everything that you decide to buy is 15% off. Just use the promo code BRINK at checkout, BRINK, and you will get that 15% off. So again, HoosierProud.com, promo code BRINK, BRINK. And now, without further ado, here is Alex's conversation with Kyle Neddenriep.
And we're pleased to be joined on this week's episode of Podcast on the Brink by a good friend, Kyle Neddenriep of the Indianapolis Star, covers high school basketball in the state of Indiana better than anyone, in my opinion. And Kyle was obviously at Seymour High School over the weekend for the New Albany-Warren Central game. So welcome to the show, Kyle. Thanks for taking the time.
You bet. Thanks, Alex. Appreciate you having me on.
So this was obviously your first trip of the state tournament to Seymour. I'd been there for sectional and regional, and the atmospheres just kind of got better, I thought, progressively, even though New Albany-Floyd Central was a great atmosphere. But I thought this weekend was on kind of a different level, even from the first two weekends. Started off with a really good game between Bar Reeve and Morristown, and then it seemed like everybody stayed in the gym for the most part for the New Albany-Warren Central game. Just your thoughts overall on the weekend that was at Seymour specifically. I thought there was two really well-played games overall.
Yeah, I agree. I walk in, I think it was about an hour and a half before tip-off of even the 1A game, the Bar Reeve Morristown game. And, you can pick up my media credentials there in the athletic office and walk onto the court. And I think you were sitting up there behind us a little bit. And, already you look up as high as the gym would hold, and there was people sitting in the highest row. And, it was just a great, great atmosphere, like you said, for the Bar Reeve Morristown game. And, it was neat to see the New Albany student section. They were kind of chanting along with the Bar Reeve section across from them, doing the same chants and the same cheers for them. And it was just, I covered so many great environments and games, and Indiana high school basketball seems like it never fails to kind of one up itself. And, and I knew that was going to be a great atmosphere. That part was not surprising. But until you get in there and see it and experience it, there's nothing like it. And it's one of the reasons I love covering high school basketball, is because people care about it. The number one story on our site, even with the NCAA tournament going on, is high school basketball. So people care, and the game, we can talk about that, but the game itself lived up to kind of what you hoped it would be, and you just two great teams battling each other, and like you said, the environment was second to none. And I hadn't been to Seymour. Covered a lot of semi-states there in the past that have been great too, but hadn't seen it quite like that. I don't think it's anyone who's there will probably not forget what that was like to be there on Saturday afternoon.
Yeah, I can remember several years ago that there was a semi-state played there, and I believe on the same day Yogi Ferrell played and Cody Zeller in the same location. And I don't remember the atmosphere being anything like it was for this New Albany-Warren Central game. And I know this is a tough question to ask, to put this maybe in perspective for people, but in terms of the atmospheres that you've seen for a high school game in the state, where does this rank for you?
Boy, that's a good question. I've covered some really good ones. I don't think anything, though, matched probably the anticipation and then the actual crowd, because, as we saw during the week, and I really wasn't planning to do a story on the ticket situation until I realized what was going on and what the whole the scalping situation and people, trying to get tickets from other schools. And I was like, man, that's something different that I had never even been around before. So, so all of that kind of is my answer, contributed to this being something different from that aspect. I remember, in Washington, that Cody Zeller team, they played in the semi-state at Southport. They played Danville, and I remember that being a really crazy atmosphere. And obviously Cody Zeller and those teams had, sold out the Hatchet House. And I remember I covered a Princeton, Washington game when Cody was there, that I think both teams were ranked number one. Princeton was in 3A. Well, actually, they're both in 3. It might have been 1 versus 2 in 3A or something like that. And that was sensational, sold out crowd as well. But I think nothing really matched it, because you had the star power of Romeo Langford, the number one and undefeated team in Warren Central. And then the Bar Reeve Morristown game, those are two great fan bases, that for smaller schools, those teams travel really well. So, all of that kind of fed into it. I'm not sure I can say it matched anything. I mean, as I sit here and think, Southport, Evansville Wrights game at Southport a couple of years ago, that was a really, really good one too. So I would say nothing's topped it. I'll say that.
As far as the actual game itself, I thought on both sides, just a really well played game. Warren Central, give them credit, because all season long they've played a lot of close games and they win all the close games. And that's a credit to their players. That's a credit to their coaching staff. For New Albany, obviously a heartbreaking loss, because I believe the only 2 times they trailed during the game was Warren Central scored first and then they scored last. New Albany either was tied or led the rest of the way. What did you think was the turning point? New Albany had that 10-point lead, I think, in the fourth quarter, and from there things started to unravel. What did you view from your perspective as the turning point in the game?
Now, there's a couple things. I didn't think New Albany probably knew, and of course you say this now, but when they had that 10-point lead, maybe you can run some more time off the clock, or maybe you can maybe you can do some different things to extend possessions a little bit longer. It's hard against that pressure, though. But I think there was definitely some areas where New Albany, once they go back and watch it, I'm sure they have already, a handful of missed free throws that were a little bit unusual, a couple of turnovers. The late, clearly, if you put your thumb on it, that late turnover to give Warren the ball back was one of the biggest plays of the game, obviously. But I thought once they had that 10-point lead, maybe you could work some more clock. But saying that, they had good possessions that ended with missed free throws at times. When you miss front ends of 1-and-1s, that opens the door a little bit. I thought that Warren, once they got down, I thought they ramped up the pressure like they always do, and were able to get some stuff out of that and then attack the basket. They had missed a lot of close shots throughout the game that just kind of rolled off, or they'd make a good move, and New Albany's length with Romeo would force them to alter shots at times a little bit and just miss them. And I thought they started hitting those shots later. And I thought David Bell down the stretch, I thought he raised it up to another level. I think he scored, I'd have to go back and look, but I know he made 4 shots in a row late in the game on drives. And I thought his physicality and what he did, down the stretch offensively was big. And also I go back and look, I know it was only the first quarter and it was 10-2 and Romeo had scored all 10 points. And it looked like, man, that Warren might get run out of the gym here. And it was 10-2 and Dean Tate stepped up and hit a 3. And even though that's very early on in the game, I thought at that point it maybe kind of settled Warren into the game a little bit. And then Dean Tate went on and had 6 threes. And so I thought that kind of got them settled down just a little bit to where, like, okay, we're okay. We've kind of, taken the first punch, but now we can just kind of settle in and play a little bit. And so I thought that even though that was early, they really needed something good to happen because Romeo was about to it looked for all the world like he was about to go out and have one of those 50-point nights. And he had a great game too. But I thought even early on, they needed that shot to go down just to have something good happen.
Yeah, I hadn't seen Warren in person up to that point, and I don't know if you agree with this or not, but, for the most part, a lot of teams that win state titles, they're obviously good teams, but they have that one, outstanding player that you look at. Last year, Ben Davis with Aaron Henry, he's going to a Big Ten school in Michigan State. And over the years, there's just been a lot of great players that have come through the state. This Warren Central team, to me, doesn't feel like there's that one stud in terms of, this guy's going to go on and play in the NBA. It's just a really well-coached and well-put-together team. Is this team, in terms of, not having that star power, as good just in terms of their balance as you've seen in the Indianapolis area in recent years?
Yeah, and it's one of the reasons because they had a senior last year, Max Smith, who was an Indiana All-Star, good player. He averaged about 19 points a game, good shooter. He went on and had a really strong freshman year at Eastern Illinois. Not a huge school, but it's a Division I program, and he's making an impact already. So he graduated. I kind of thought, well, they lost their main guy. There's no real star, coming back. So I had them, I think 10th or 11th in our preseason Fab 15, which is just Central Indiana teams. And that's nothing to, it's not terrible or anything, but certainly I underestimated them. I thought Max Smith's graduation would hurt them more than it did, clearly. So, that's a credit. I think Chris Byers he's coached there for 3 years. And these last 2 years, especially, they just really buy in to to the style he wants to play, to sharing the ball, because they have guys on that team who probably could, Antoine Cushenberry, who transferred in from Lawrence North. He's a Warren Township resident and had gone to Lawrence North for 3 years and transferred over. I didn't know how he would mesh in, the first year, being at Warren, and it's been seamless, really. And so you credit, Chris Byers, who has a long history at Bloomington South as an assistant. He knows what it's like to be around winning programs. It's been part of winning programs. So, you can't say enough about the job he's done. But also for the leadership on the team, I think, David Bell is one of the best just best kids to talk to. He's just a really quality, good head on his shoulders, a very good football player. And then Dean Tate is also a really good leader. From that standpoint, they both, when you talk to them, they seem like they're a lot older than what they are. So I think from a leadership on the court standpoint, that's been a big reason why they've been able to do what they've done. Because you're right. I mean, they don't have that guy, that one guy that a lot of 4A teams have that can go get you 30 points on a given night. But they have a lot of guys who can get 15. And when you have that, they basically have 6 guys who can all score, on a given night, 15, 18 points. So that gives you a lot of balance. And I think, it's hard to guard a team that has 5 guys on the court like that. Most teams don't have that. So that's been a big factor for them this year. And then from a defensive standpoint, they're probably unlike anybody because of their pressure and it's just constant. It's 32 minutes, and you've got to be able to handle that the entire game, or they will. It'll eventually wear you down and beat you.
From the New Albany side of things, obviously a lot of disappointment for them, just based on the season that they had. They lose 2 games, one early in the season at Floyd Central, who I thought Floyd Central was one of the top teams I saw all season, and then to lose the way they did. How do you think this team will be? This New Albany team will be remembered? Obviously, Romeo is the standout and kind of the once in a generation talent. But overall, there was, I thought, a lot of kids on New Albany that got better as the season went along, and they overall had really an outstanding year. So how do you think they're remembered when the dust settles on this season?
Well, I know some people will say they missed an opportunity, or that, they underachieved. And I don't believe that. I don't know if they were as talented as some teams that are out there necessarily, from 1 to 5 or 1 to whatever the bench, however many guys they play. But they had 2 guys in Romeo Langford and Sean East who are as good as any backcourt, especially, and like you said, they had different guys kind of step into bigger roles. Julian Hunter is going to be a nice player, already is, for them. And so, I guess a long answer, I don't think they underachieved. I think this was a game where, and Carmel could very well go out and beat Warren this week, and that wouldn't be a huge shock either. But this is almost like another state championship game, when you get those 2 teams on the court together. I'm sure, like we said, they're going to go back and really feel like they missed some opportunities late in that Warren game to, put the clamps on them and maybe at least send that game to overtime or get the last shot at least. And that's going to haunt them, I think, for a while. But this is also, you look back and they won state 2 years ago. They had an excellent team again last year that came up a little bit short. And this team, I think this year, I know it didn't end like they wanted it to, but when you get to this point in the tournament playing such good teams, it's going to come down to 1 possession games. And in this case, maybe they win that game 5 out of 10 and Warren wins 5 out of 10. I think it was just that type of a matchup. And I hope they're remembered because I think they were 100 wins and 10 losses, I think is what it was over 4 years. So that's a lot of wins. That's consistent winning. And I thought Jim Shannon, for everything that he had to do to kind of handle and control a little bit of the situation, with Romeo and the media always wanting to be part of things. I'm sure he's probably in some aspects ready for that part of it to be over a little bit. But I thought he did a sensational job over the years of kind of, keeping everything in check from that aspect and kind of shielding Romeo from some of that as much as he could and still making it a good experience for him. So, but I'm sure in the same token, he's going to miss him a lot too. But everything they did, I think, over 4 years was class and quality all the way through.
Romeo specifically, you had an interesting piece a couple weeks ago. It might have been a month now or so ago. Time's starting to run together, but you ranked, the best players that you'd seen since you'd come to the Indianapolis Star covering high school basketball in the state. You had Romeo number 1, and I'm curious why you had him number 1 on that list, and just what about him maybe makes him stand above anybody else that you've covered since you've been in your job.
Well, I had got some feedback from people, and appreciate anytime you write something like that, you expect feedback from people, and a lot of it was positive, and some of it was for instance, Deshaun Thomas was, ended up higher on the scoring list than Romeo did, and was a standout, but I tried not to look at, it'd be easy just to run down the points list and slot them that way. To me, that's not what this is about. It's just from a dominance standpoint, from an all around player standpoint, from what he did in big games, from what how he handled double teams, how he handled everything. I thought, to me, he was the best overall just player. I thought there was times where maybe he had to do more than from his aspect of scoring. There was games where I saw him give it up all the time. He didn't really seem to care about the records and the accolades and all that, and that's only part of it. But I just thought from an overall talent standpoint, from an overall here's what he did for his team standpoint, I thought he was number one. There's been some really good players, obviously, Trey Lyles and Gary Harris and Trayvon Blewett and Deshaun Thomas, and you can go down the list, Cody Zeller, Yogi Ferrell, all great players. But, to me, Romeo has a little bit extra that kind of made him the number one player, and nothing against those other guys. There's nothing wrong with being, anywhere on that list. And I think there's arguments for a lot of them to maybe be number one. But I was just always impressed with how he carried himself. And, I hope kids watched, those kids who were getting his autographs, I hope they watched how he handled things. And even if you're not a basketball player, how do you handle adversity when it's thrown at you? How do you react when things are not going well? Are you going to pout? Are you going to sulk? Are you going to lash out? He never did that. At least I never saw it. So I think that's a good lesson, for all those kids who are getting his autograph and everything. I hope they watch that, because I thought in that aspect he was a good role model for kids to watch. So I hope, if nothing else, they took that away from, in addition to all the, the fun memories and everything, they took that away from watching him.
So there's one weekend to go now here in the season. Obviously, each of the four classes will have their state championship game this weekend in Bankers Life Fieldhouse. What are you looking forward to the most? Obviously, there's four great games. The 4A game will obviously get the most attention because it's the biggest schools, and you have Warren Central going for the undefeated state championship. What are kind of some of the storylines that you think people should pay attention to heading into this weekend?
Oh, there's a lot of good ones. The Morristown story is a fun one. That's I did a story earlier this year, and Hayden Lankable, I think he proved he had a really nice dunk over somebody in that Bar Reeve game, and he got fouled, and I think that surprised a lot of people. He's an explosive player. He's going to Marion to play his college ball, and he's had an exceptional career. It's kind of a fun story. His parents own the Copper Kettle restaurant in Morristown, and it's an old-fashioned, restaurant. It's sit-down, kind of fancy place, and it's been there for years. It's famous. People come there from all over the country, and he lives upstairs, up above that restaurant with his parents, and lives basically a stone's throw from the school, and grew up, playing outside at the school, and then, he had a key to get in the school gym, and that's just kind of a neat small town story. And they've never made it this far, never made it to the state finals. So that's that's one of those small town Hickory, type stories. So that'll be fun. And they play a very good Southwood team in the 1A game. Mark Galloway from Culver, his son Trey is a really good player on that Culver team. They surprised Newcastle in 3A to make it, and they'll be playing Evansville Bosse, who keeps knocking on that door and trying to get through and win a state championship, with Mackay Larry, who's going to Miami of Ohio. Only 5'7", but a really dynamic. If Romeo wasn't in this class, he'd probably get more of the headlines. But really, really good player. Had a chance to see him several times in these games late in the season. So he's going to be something to watch. And then, the 4A game, I think, clearly that this is a rematch. It's a game that maybe, if New Albany was there, probably brings more fans. If Newcastle would have won 3A, that probably would have brought more fans too. But this will be a really good game in its own right, and there's a lot of history, between these schools in football and basketball. So a lot of connections, between the two schools. Chris Byers, like I mentioned, he was part of the last. I talked to him about this today, but the last time a 4A team was undefeated was Bloomington South in 2009 with Jordan Holes. He was an assistant for that team. So kind of comes full circle now. 9 years later, he's a head coach for an undefeated team going into this. So has a little bit of background with that, and that'll be an interesting game in its own right. Carmel is really good. They're healthy and healthier than they've been all year, and so I think that's a game that could definitely go either way. And then the Forest Park Oak Hill game in 2A, I think, big teams for being smaller schools. A lot of size on both those teams. And again, two communities that really support basketball, one from Oak Hill from the north and Forest Park from the south. So, that should be a really good crowd there for that 12:45 game. And as well as I think the 1A and 2A game will bring really good crowds in that early session. So I'm looking forward to it. I always spend the whole day there on Saturday and watch every game and try to, gather some good stories or some good anecdotes, and looking forward to what should be another fun Saturday.
Well, thank you, Kyle, for joining us. Everyone, I would encourage you to, if you're not already, which most of you that listen to this show probably are, follow Kyle on Twitter at Kyle Neddenriep. Read his work in the Indy Star and at IndyStar.com, as I said earlier in the podcast. And I'm not just saying this because he's been gracious enough to come on the show. I don't think anyone in the state does a better job covering high school basketball than Kyle does for the Star. So thanks again for the time, Kyle. We will look forward to your coverage this weekend, and hopefully you get 4 good games to watch up at Bankers Life. Should be a fun weekend.
No doubt, and good to see you Saturday down there, and thanks for having me on the show, Alex.
No problem. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Podcast on the Brink. We always appreciate you being here. To get more from me and from Alex, visit assemblycall.com and insidethehall.com for complete coverage of Indiana University basketball. If you liked this episode, please consider sharing it with a friend or family member who loves IU basketball as much as you do. You can also support the show by leaving a rating and review on iTunes, which helps us get the word out to more IU fans like yourself. We will be back next week with a new episode. Until then, as always, go Hoosiers.